Hey guys, in this tutorial I'll be showing you how to create a pretty simple charge jump mechanic that you can add to your player. So just to show you, this is what it will look like. So you can see at the bottom I have a little meter bar, and if I hold down space it charges all the way up, and if I let go, my guy will jump depending on how high it was full. So you can see right there it was fully charged, so I jumped pretty high. If I just tap it, I'll only jump a little bit. If I hold it down about halfway, I'll jump about halfway. And yeah, so it's pretty simple, pretty effective little thing that you can do to make jumping in your game a little bit more exciting. So that being said, I'll go right into it. So first thing, of course, is open up the Epic Game Launcher and launch whatever version of Unreal you're on. I'm currently using 4.23.1. And we're going to be doing this in blueprints, and we're going to be using the first person blueprint. So go to blueprints and then select new project and find the first person, first person blueprint. And I'll just call this charge jump tutorial, and then go ahead and create the project. And I'll bring that one over there so I can kind of reference it. All right, so obviously if you go ahead and run right now, you can only jump the default jump that comes with the first person template. So let's go ahead and start changing that. So the first thing we're going to want to do is open up our character blueprint. So over here on the left at the bottom, go into blueprints and then open up the first person character. And inside here, we're going to create a few variables and a few functions that we're going to end up using. And we'll just go ahead and do that first. So on the left here, click this variable button to create a new variable. And the first one we want is called jump key down. And we want it to be a Boolean. And on the right here, go ahead and set that to private, since we're only going to be accessing it from within our class. And I'm just going to go ahead and add it to a jumping category, just so you can kind of easily see which variables are part of the jumping stuff and which ones are not. And then right-click on this one, right-click on it and duplicate it. And we're going to call this one jump charge. And we're going to change this one to a float. And again, this one is going to be private because we duplicated it. So these are our two jumping variables, and these variables are going to change as the code, as you press buttons and as things happen. These variables are going to change and be set to whatever they need to be set to. But we also want some variables to easily configure, like how high you jump, like what's the minimum you jump, what's the maximum you jump, how long do you have to hold down the button before it lets you jump, and like that type of stuff. So for those, again, we're going to create another variable, and the first one we're going to create is called jump charge time. And basically what this is going to be how many seconds that the player needs to hold down the spacebar or the jump key until the meter is fully charged. So since this one is not a variable that's going to be changing as the game progresses, we're going to go up here and we're going to set this to blueprint read only so that it cannot be changed. And we're also going to set it to private again, since we're only going to be accessing it from this class. And I'm going to set the category to jumping, and then in parentheses I'm going to put constant. So we know that anything in this under this header is a constant variable. And so if you drag it out now and you see there's no set for it because it's not meant to be set. It's just a nice thing to do for organizational sake and to like prevent other developers from using your code incorrectly. And then we want two more constants, one for the min jump height and one for the max jump height. So duplicate this and call it min jump. And we're not going to use height, we're going to use velocity. So the minimum velocity and the maximum velocity. Max jump velocity. So we have one for min and one for max. So these are all the jumping variables we're going to need for our project. And the other ones we're going to want are some functions. So we're going to want three functions. One of them is just going to be a tick function for our jumping, so I'm just going to call it tick jump. And it's going to take in an input type that's a float, and it's going to be the delta seconds. And we're going to want another one for actually performing the jump. So I'll make another one and call it perform jump. And we want one more for getting the current jump charge. So get jump charge. And this is technically all we need to do, but I'm just going to set a few properties on these functions just to make them a little bit more appropriate. So tick jump, we just want to set to private, and I'm going to add it to a jumping category as well. Actually, I'm just going to drag all of these into the jumping category. The perform jump, we also want it to be private. And the get jump height, we want it to be private, or we want it to be public, and we want it to be pure, since it's not going to be changing anything, and we want it to be constant, since it's not going to be changing anything about our class. So now that we have that, we have all of the functions and all the variables that we need in order to do our charge jump. So let's get right into it. So the first thing we're going to need to change is back on the event graph. There is this section for jumping, kind of towards the bottom, down here. This is the section we're going to be modifying primarily. So I'm just going to go ahead and drag this down to the bottom, just so we have a little bit more room to work with it. And we don't want to do this built-in jumping logic, so just go ahead and delete those. And we kind of want to do our own. So we're going to drag in this jump key down variable, and we're going to set it depending on if the input action jump is pressed or released. So if it's pressed, we're going to set it to true because it was pressed. And when it's released, we're going to go ahead and set it to false. So this will kind of keep track of whether or not our jump key is down for us. And when the jump key is pressed for the first time, we also want to set our jump charge to 0. And basically what our jump charge is it's just going to be a value from 0 to 1, indicating how much our jump is currently charged. So if it's 0, then they just started holding down the space bar, and if it's 1, then they've been holding down the space bar for however long it takes them to fully charge the jump. But when they first start jumping, we always want to make sure that the jump charge is reset to 0. And when they release the key is when we actually want to do the jump. So off of this, we're going to call our perform jump function. So again, just to kind of recap, when they press the jump key, we're going to say the jump key's down, and we're going to reset our jump charge to 0. And then when they release it, we're going to say that the key was released, and we're going to actually perform the jump. So that's pretty simple. And another thing we want to do down here in the event tick is call our little tick jump function, which we're going to fill out soon. And we just want to hook up the pins like so that the delta of seconds gets passed in. And the only other thing we want to do in the event graph is in the begin play, we're going to want to add that little widget that shows the progress, or it shows the how far or how much the bar is filled up. But we're not going to do that quite yet. For right now, to show what it is, we're just going to print out our current jump height. So drag this in and say print string, like so, and hook that up. So if you go ahead and run it now, really nothing will happen. It's just going to print out a bunch of zeros because the jump height is, the jump charge is just 0 because we're not actually changing it. So let's go ahead and do that right now. So in the event tick, if you double click on that to open it up and start editing it, in here is where we want to actually modify this jump charge to go from 0 to 1 if the jump key is down. So like I just said, the first thing we want to check is if the jump key is down. So we'll drag this in, and we'll make a branch off of that. And so if the jump key is down, then we actually want to do stuff. If the jump key is not down, then we really don't want to do anything for our jumping because they're not trying to jump. So if the jump key is down, we also want to check if they can jump, because we don't want them to be able to jump if they're already in the air, or if they're in the water, or they're in a car, or just any other weird situation. So Unreal has a built-in can jump function, which for our purposes works totally fine. It just checks a bunch of stuff about if you're falling and all that built-in stuff. If you have other things in your game that you might need to check here to prevent him from jumping, you might want to wrap this function up in another function. But for our purposes, this is good. So we just want to say, can he jump? And again, this will just prevent him from jumping if he's already trying to jump. So if the jump key's down and he can jump, then we want to start increasing this jump charge value. So I guess we can drag this in. And again, this value is just going to be from 0 to 1, where 0 means he has no charge and 1 means he has full charge. So we want to slowly increment this up over time as the jump key is being held down. And if you remember from the beginning, we made this jump charge time variable, which I said was the amount of time that it takes the player to fully charge his bar if he's holding down the jump key. So right now you can see it's set to 0, which isn't great. Let's go ahead and set it to something else like, so yeah, click on it on the left and then set it to like 0.5. So basically it's saying after 0.5 seconds, the bar will be fully charged. And obviously if you want it to be more or less than that, feel free to set it to whatever you want. So we just need to do a little bit of math here, because basically we're going to want to say jump charge plus something, and then set our jump charge again, right? So we take the current jump charge, we're going to add something to it, and then we're going to take the result of that and set our jump charge again. So one thing we need to do that's really important, before we just set it like this, we want to clamp it between 0 and 1. So that way if the value goes over 1, it's not going to actually go over 1, it's going to get clamped to 1, because we don't want to have a charge that's higher than 1. Even if you hold down the space bar for like, say 5 seconds, we still want you to only jump as if you had a full charge. So that's what that clamps for. And then this little plus right here is we need to figure this out. So we know we want it to be based on the delta seconds, because anytime you're changing something over time in a game, you need to be based on the delta seconds so that it's not like frame rate dependent. So we'll say get delta seconds. And basically what we're going to say is we're just going to divide this by our max jump velocity, which again is just 0.5. So, oh, not our max jump velocity, oops, our jump charge time, which is 0.5. And hook that up like that. So if you kind of think about it, if your jump charge time is say like 10 seconds, then it's going to divide the delta seconds by 10, thus making it 10% of what it was before. So it'll take 10 times longer to fully reach 1 second. So that's kind of the logic behind why we're doing that. But yeah, it's pretty simple math. So that will make it increment at the correct speed, and then we set our jump time to that value. So that's pretty much all we need to do in this function. If we go ahead and rerun this now, hopefully we should see, if we hold down space, you'll see it went from 0 to 1. I'll do it, run it again. 0, I hold it down, it goes to 1. If we change the jump charge time to say like 5, just so it's a little slower, and we start holding it down right now, you can see after 5 seconds, it will get up to 1, like so. But yeah, so I'm going to set it back to 0.5. But like you saw, once we released it, our guy is not jumping, which is not great, because we want him to jump. And the reason he's not jumping is, of course, because we are not actually calling, or we're not actually doing anything in this perform jump function. It's just empty. So let's go ahead and fill that out right now. So if you open that up, again, we want to check can jump in here, just to be like super sure that the player can still jump. And we'll do a branch off of that. And if he can jump, then we basically want to make him jump, obviously. So the way we're going to do that is with a function called launch character. And what this will do is kind of just apply a force to the character and whatever launch velocity you give him. So if you give him a launch velocity along the z-axis, which is up, then he'll launch in that direction and kind of make it look like he's jumping. So if this is true, then we want to launch the character. And then it just becomes a question of what velocity do we give it. So like I said, we only want him to launch in the z direction. So I'm going to go ahead and split this so that we can only modify the z. And we know that we want it to be based on these min jump velocity and max jump velocity variables, because if the jump charge is 0, we basically want to use the min jump velocity. If the jump charge is 1, then we want to use the max jump velocity. And we should probably set these to something, because currently they're just 0. So let's set the max one to like 1,000, and we'll set the min to like 300. And again, feel free to change these to whatever you want. So the way we're going to do that is with the lerp function. So this is going to interpolate between A and B based on alpha. So alpha is going to be our jump charge, and alpha is expected to be a value between 0 and 1, which is exactly what our jump charge is. And what lerp does is it just says, okay, if alpha is 0, use 100% of whatever you pass for A, and if alpha is 1, use 100% of what is passed for B, and if it's somewhere in between, then interpolate between those values. So our A is going to be our min jump velocity, our B is going to be our max jump velocity, and the result is going to be our launch velocity z. And the last thing we want to do after he's jumped is reset our jump charge to 0 since we've performed the jump, like so. So now if we save this and we run it, if I hold down spacebar, get it up to 1, and then let go, you can see my guy jumps pretty high. If I just tap it, it'll only jump a little bit. So that's the basic functionality already working. Like I said, it's pretty simple. And again, if you try to like jump in the air or something, it's not going to let you because of those checks that we have. So you can kind of jump around and, jump or hold it down depending on how high you need to actually jump. So yeah, it's pretty neat. So the last thing we need to do is actually set the widget or the little bar at the bottom to show how, what charge you're at, as opposed to just printing out numbers on the left, because that's kind of lame. So let's go ahead and remove this little print string in our event graph, and we're going to replace it with a bar to make it a little nicer. So come back to the content directory, and wherever you like, just right click, and we're going to create a new user interface, and we're going to make a widget blueprint. And we're going to name this jump charge underscore widget. So this is where we're going to create the little bar thing. So we don't really want a canvas panel. I want to use something called a uniform grid panel. So right click on this and say replace with uniform grid panel. And I just want to use this because you'll notice if I drag something into it, it lets me kind of center it or position it at the bottom much easier than a canvas panel does. So the first thing we want is a size box so that we can set the size of the bar. And then inside of the size box, we want the progress bar. So dragging a progress bar into the size box. So we got a uniform grid panel, size box, and then a progress bar. So the size box, click on it, and then on the right here, we want to center it, and then we want to put it at the bottom. And we want to override the width and the height of this thing. And for the width, we'll just go with like 500. And for the height, we'll go with like 20. And as you can see, it's kind of like right at the bottom of the screen, which isn't great. We don't want it to be like totally at the bottom. We want to have a little bit of room underneath it. So you can do that pretty easily just by coming down to the transform and giving it like a -50 or something for the Y, and that'll kind of raise it up above the bottom of the screen. And so yeah, so that's pretty simple. So the progress bar, the way this works, again, this is a pretty simple little widget. You can like obviously set the color of it and stuff, we'll just set to like orange or something. But the main thing we want to focus on is somewhere in here, yeah, the percentage. So you can see if you drag this, it'll actually kind of show you what it's doing. So when it's 1, it'll be fully charged, and when it's 0, it'll be empty. And this value we want to set to whatever the current value of our jump charge variable is. So we'll create a binding for it by clicking the little binding here on the right and hit a create binding. And that'll immediately create a little function for us, and it wants us to return the value to pass in for right here. So we need to get that from our player. So we're going to say get player character, and we need to cast it to our first person character since we're a child class of the character class. So we'll say cast to first person character. This way we can get access to our get charge function. So we'll say get jump charge. And we need to write this function still. So real quick, go back to the first person character. And this get jump charge function, we never actually wrote it, but it's very simple. It's just going to return the jump charge. So drag in the jump charge, get it, and if you drag the pin onto the input pin, it will create a return node with the name, and then you can just hook it up. And so that's all this is doing, it's just returning the jump charge. And so we'll say get jump charge, and that is the value we want to return for our progress bar percentage. So now if we save this, if we run it right now, like it's not going to do anything because we haven't actually added the progress bar to the screen. So that's the last thing we need to do in the event graph. So go back to the first person character and go back to the event graph, and then up here at the top, there's a begin play. And we actually want to add our code for the other code. So kind of drag this to the left a little bit, and then we're going to right click and say create widget. And the widget we want to create is our jump charge widget that we just made. And the owning player is, you could say get player controller. That works, but a little better way to do it, in my opinion, is to say get controller, which is like guaranteed to be the controller of this player, just in case you're doing like multiplayer stuff. And then you can cast this to a player controller, and then right click right here and convert it to a pure cast, since we know that it's going to be a player controller, and then hook that up instead. So this is a little bit better way to do it, so you don't have a hard-coded 0 right here. Just kind of a preference. If you're making a single player game, it doesn't really matter. And then once we have it created, we just want to say add to viewport and hook that up like so. And so yeah, so that's creating our little widget. It's creating this guy, and it's adding it to the screen. So if we go ahead and save all this and run it now, you can see if we hold down space, it charges up, and when we let go, it goes away. So yeah, like I said, this was a pretty simple tutorial. Somebody was kind of asking for how to do like a charge dump, so that's the reason I wanted to make it. But if you enjoyed the video, please leave a thumbs up and subscribe. Thanks.